this is where we came. At the end of the last session, we came to this, which was the purpose of Scripture is to unite you with the memories of what God has done with other people so that your experience can be integrated with theirs, so you can discover that you're part of a long heritage of God's interaction with his chosen people and be refreshed that you have a commentary about how God interacted with all these people. Okay? So it's not dogma, it's not doctrine, it's not theology. It never was theology. That's why the Jews don't have a systematic theology, because they don't package this stuff up according to topic. They have a living word called the Talmud and all the rabbinic material since then, which is an ongoing discussion of how these things impact their lives. Okay? So that means in order for us to really understand what the purpose of all this is, we need to ask a real simple question. What does it mean to be human? Because that's what God has in mind. He'd like you to become human, right? Oh, you thought you were born human. Oh my gosh, what a mistake. You were born Homo sapien, right? That's a creature capable of being human. But according to the text, there's some qualifications that come along the way. Because when God says, let us make man in our own image, he doesn't mean make people that are Homo sapiens. He means to make people who look like him. And so now what we want to know is, what does that mean? Being human. Oh, I forgot. I have to press this. So let's consider the human problem. Why am I here? Oh, I should back up. I think that there's a video here. No, I don't remember how to get it. What do I have to do?
Right click.
Right click. Listen. Oh, we got to have sound. Start over.
And so we ask ourselves,
Start over. We have to have sound. We don't have to have no lights, but we have to have sound.
You can start it.
I can start it over. Okay, here we go.
That worked.
men are haunted by the vastness of eternity. And so we ask ourselves, will our actions echo across the centuries? Will strangers hear our names long after we're gone and wonder who we were, how bravely we fought, how fiercely we loved?
All right. The beginning of the movie Troy, which, by the way, if you want to understand the Greek culture, is a fabulous movie because the dialogue is actually very Greek. Remember what he said? Men are haunted by the vastness of eternity. He didn't say men are haunted by the vastness of space. Who cares how much space there is? You know what they care about? Will people remember me after I'm gone? Right? The vastness of eternity. In other words, given enough time, everything disappears. So who's going to remember me? Who's going to remember who I am and what I did, what I stood for, what kind of person I was 1,000 years from now, 10,000 years from now, right? That's the Greek problem. The Greek problem is not my character today. The Greek problem is, will I be remembered? And so he says, will our actions echo across the centuries? Okay? So this is the essential human problem. I mean, you face it every time somebody says, do you have a will? Right? And think about it. Ecclesiastes raises the same problem. Right? What advantage is it for the man to be intelligent when he's buried right next to the fool? What difference does it make for the man who's wealthy who's buried next to the pauper? Give your money away to your children. They blow it all, and nobody cares after 2 generations. I mean, it's over and over and over the same kind of problems. Ecclesiastes is an empiricist. He doesn't allow God in the picture, and he ends up with the Greek problem. What's his answer? Well, do the best you can, and maybe you'll get a good night's sleep once in a while, and, that's it. And then at the end, of course, they have to alter it to make it fit, so they add a little appendix at the end about This is what you can do. Love God and serve him, etc., etc. But every scholar will tell you that that's not part of the original text. The original text is quite dour, quite depressing. In fact, I used to say to my pastor friends that if you really want to preach evangelism, you'll preach Ecclesiastes. And then when people exit, you have a 38 special on one side for suicide, and you have the 4 spiritual laws on the other side, because you only have 2 choices. You kill yourself now, or you hope that you're going to go to heaven. I mean, it's, Ecclesiastes is a very, very dour book. So they added this piece at the end that makes it sort of redeems it, right? But it's this Greek problem that drives that, which is, what does our life really mean? I'm here, I'm gone. Three generations from now, nobody will remember that I was here in Alaska talking to you. Won't make any difference. So what does it mean to be alive? Okay, let's see if the Hebrews have an answer. Why am I here? Did you like that little fire thing? Yeah, let's go back, fire. Boom. Meaning, destiny, legacy. That's why I'm here. Those 3 things come up over and over and over in the Western world. The meaning of my life, the destiny, what I'm born to do, the legacy I leave behind. Okay? So, we look for answers where? With the reason, the cognitive West. We look for rational answers. Okay? If we don't find a rational answer, and sometimes we don't because life is pretty crazy. Right? What's that great line from the International? I think I have it, but I'll tell you now so that you'll know what it was. The older gentleman in the International says the difference between truth and fiction is that fiction has to make sense. Did you hear that? The difference between truth and fiction is that fiction has to make sense. Okay? So reason, the Greeks wanted a reasonable explanation for things. They applied logic to everything. If it didn't make sense, they either threw it out or said, well, we just don't have enough information yet, which is what we still do today, right? We can't fix the problem. What do we need to do? Spend more money or get more data, okay? The Hebrews had a different idea, okay? So let's listen to what Achilles has to say.
You stay in Larissa. You will find peace. You will find a wonderful woman. You will have sons and daughters, and they will have children. And they will love you. When you're gone, they will remember you. But when your children are dead, and their children after them, your name will be lost. If you go to Troy, glory will be yours. They will write stories about your victories for thousands of years. The world will remember your name. If you go to Troy, no, you will never come home. For your glory walks hand in hand with your doom. And I shall never see you again.
Okay, I see Robert's enjoying this. Okay, so what does Achilles choose? He chooses glory. And of course, in the Greek world, glory comes with how you die, not how you live. Okay? It's a culture of death. The most important thing is how you die, because that's how people will remember you. Okay? So the answer, the reasonable answer is, figure out what your glory is, follow it, and die well. Okay? Let's see what else happens. Oh, we look for answers in tradition. Do I have this? Yes, I do.
All my life, I've lived by a code. And the code is simple. Honor the gods, love your woman, and defend your country. Troy is mother to us all. Fight for her!
Now here comes Achilles.
Mohammedans, my brothers of the sword. I'd rather fight beside you than any army of thousands. Let no man forget how menacing we are. We are lions! Do you know what's there? Waiting, beyond that beach. Immortality! Take it! It's yours!
Okay, immortality. Why would it be immortality? Because people will write stories about your victories for thousands of years. Has nothing to do with going to heaven. Has to do with dying a death that people will remember. Okay? So, what else? Revelation. If you can't find the answer in reason, and you can't find the answer in tradition, where else can you turn? Only to a voice from outside the box. That's why the Western world can't actually handle revelation, because it's committed to reason and tradition. Right? It's committed to rational explanations of the world and the traditions that go along with understanding who we are, what we're about. But God doesn't work that way. God has an answer that comes from outside the box. Right? So as soon as I throw away God's answer that came from outside the box, I'm left only with reason and tradition. And reason and tradition is all about how I die, not how I live. God is interested in something else. So let's see. How should we read the biblical text? Well, the definition determined by the culture, you know this. Redefining the terms means violating the text. Blessed are the merciful. Okay? And this is an example. The word for mercy there in Greek comes from a Hebrew word. The reason we know it comes from a Hebrew word is because this is a citation of Psalm 37:11, I think. Anyway, it's not something that Yeshua made up. He just quoted a verse that they already knew. And since he quoted it in Hebrew, we know what it means in Hebrew because we can go look at the psalm that he quoted from and find the Hebrew text. Okay? The problem is, it doesn't mean merciful. It's okay that you learn the Beatitude, blessed are the merciful, for they shall receive mercy, which sounds like a spiritual tautology. Oh, that's a bad word, tautology. That's a difficult word, huh? It's okay? All right. It means A equals A. Okay? So, what we have to ask ourselves is when Yeshua was teaching, and he was teaching in Hebrew, what was he actually teaching about? And the reason that we need to know this is because there's a whole bunch of words that are involved with what it means to be human that are Hebrew, not Greek. So let's look. Created in God's image. We're going to talk about Salem and Demut, but I need to fill you in on why merciful doesn't work. Okay? Because in Hebrew, the word merciful is a translation of the word chesed. We'll get to that. Hang on, because it's going to become a very, very important word. The problem is that when the Septuagint used the word hesed in Hebrew, it translated it in Greek into ilios, which means mercy. Okay? Unfortunately, it also used 8 other Greek words to translate this because the Greek translators knew that hesed didn't have one meaning in Greek. In fact, it doesn't have any meaning in Greek at all because there's no way to capture chesed in one word, even in English. So, it doesn't mean merciful, it doesn't mean long-suffering, it doesn't mean loving kindness, it doesn't mean goodness, it doesn't mean any of those words that we choose in English to try to capture this idea. The idea, however, becomes really, really important when we want to understand the character of God. So now we're going to back up and look at what does God say about what it means to be human so that we can understand what we have to do in order to fulfill the revelation that he gives about our being here, our existence. Okay, so this is the first one. What is typical of the view of image? I don't have the right prop, but we'll try. Okay? What is an image? This is perfect. Yes? A shape, yes. What else? Is Xerox an image? Is Xerox an image? Yes? Okay. So here is the story. Esther, would you rather have a Xerox copy of this or the real thing?
The real thing,
Oh, why? A Xerox copy looks exactly the same.
but it's a copy.
Ah, but it's a copy. That's the whole point. An image implies that there is an original, and this is a copy. Okay? Did you get that? So when it says, let us create man in our own image, it means that it's a copy, right? That there's original, which is God, and then there's the copy. Okay? Now I want you to think about that because I'm going to tell you about Thomas Aquinas. Do you know who Thomas Aquinas is? Thomas Aquinas, in the Catholic Church, Thomas Aquinas is called the spiritual doctor because Thomas Aquinas' work, Summa Theologica and a bunch of other ones, became the foundation of all Christian theology, including Christian Protestant theology, right? Thomas Aquinas defined the character of God in the following terms. You will be quite familiar with these: omnipotent, omniscient, omnipresent, eternal, perfect, holy, immutable, impassible. Do you know those terms? Right, you've heard them, right? God is omniscient, omnipotent, omnipresent. He's everywhere. He can do everything. He knows everything. He's perfect. He's eternal, etc., right? Okay? And what Thomas Aquinas said is, those are the characteristics of God, and man is just the opposite. It's called the via negativa, by way of the negative. So, God is omnipotent. He can do everything. Man is not. Right? Man can't do everything. He can only do some things. Okay? God is omnipresent. He's everywhere. Man is not. Okay? God is omniscient. He knows everything. Man is not. God is eternal. Man is temporal. God is holy. Man is imperfect, unholy. You can see how it works, right? Okay? So, now let me ask you this. If Thomas Aquinas' definition of God is correct, then the Genesis 1:26 passage has to be a lie. Because what does God say? Let us make man in our own image. And you're not omniscient, omnipresent, omnipotent, perfect, holy, immutable, right? You're not anything like that. You're not one single thing that God is. So God must have been lying. What he really should have said is, let's make man in the image opposite of us. Right? But he doesn't say that, which means that Thomas Aquinas' definition of God must be wrong. Because if God says he's going to make copies, he doesn't mean that he's going to take that $100 bill and give you a 1. Oh, that's a copy? It's almost the same, just missing a couple of zeros. Right? Okay. Well, right? What would you rather have? What would you rather have? The original 100 or the copy of the 1? I mean, the whole point is, you see what's happened? We've accepted the Christian doctrine of Aquinas and given God characteristics that aren't like us at all. But the Genesis account says that we are a copy of him, right? It's not that we're a sort of hopeful image kind of like, but maybe not quite. It says we're a copy like him. Okay, so what can that possibly mean? Well, what's consistent with the ancient Near Eastern? What's consistent with the ancient Near Eastern cultures? The Hebrew explanation of being a copy of God is not like any other ancient culture of the human civilization, right? In other words, in most cultures, Dave, what was the purpose of making human beings in almost all the cultures? Babylonian, Assyrian, Persian, Egyptian, Canaanite. What was the purpose of making human beings?
Serve the gods.
What?
Serve the gods.
Serve the gods, yeah. You know what that meant? Take out the garbage, clean the dishes, mop the floors, make sure that I get served my mint julep on time. Basically, it's the whole idea of making human beings was to do the things I don't want to do. To take care of all the mundane, routine stuff that the gods don't get involved in. So if you were an Assyrian or a Persian or a Babylonian, and you believe that the gods created men, they created men to be slaves, to be servants, right? By the way, there's a real good reason why Pharaoh is the son of God. You know what that's the meaning of the word. He's the son of Ra, Pharaoh, right? And he's a god, which means that everybody serves him because they are all slaves of the god. Okay? So the real difference between the Hebrew idea and the rest of the ancient world is that God doesn't make slaves. He makes people who are like him. Not like, okay, just serve me, right? Okay, so when it comes to the idea of image, it's completely different than anything else in the ancient Near East. That's really important. You don't think of that today because you don't realize how important that was for the ancient people to hear, that there was actually a God who made them like gods. Okay, so how did he do that? Well, the text tells us about image, and it tells us that there are two words that we need for image, tselem and demut. And if there are two words, that means that there's two ideas that we have to combine. It's not enough to just be a copy. It's a copy for a reason. Okay? So let's see if we can find out. Demut, comparing a likeness. So that's my photocopy. It's like it. It's not the original, but it's like it. Okay? It also means, in Paleo Hebrew, this is really interesting, adore, chaos, secure, and covenant. Those are the meanings of the four Hebrew consonants. And so it seems to me that one of the things that God is trying to communicate is that your job in being like God is to make sure that you create a pathway where the covenant secures the impact of chaos. Right? Now, think about the Egyptian culture. Chaos is the enemy. The whole world floats on the sea of chaos. It's out to get you. So what does God do? He creates human agents who act as barriers between chaos and security, and he does that through a covenant relationship, right? Built into the consonants, okay? So that means there's action required, right? You just can't sit around and say, well, I'm omnipotent, I must be like God. There's action that's required. You have to do something, and you have to do it in regard to the revelation that God gives. It's not just doing anything. It's doing anything according to the revelation that he gives. Okay? So how are you like God? Well, let's think about this. What does God do in the first chapter of Genesis? He creates. Okay? Can you create like God? Oh, you're going to say, no, I can't create out of nothing. I always have to have something to create from. But what if the verse says, when God began to create, right? Which doesn't say that there was nothing there. It just says when he began the creative effort, the place was a mess. Chaos and void, chaos and emptiness, right? Yeah, tohu vavohu. What does God do? What does God do? He what? He brings order to the world. Can you do that? No, you can't. Your life is such a mess. Oh, wait a minute. Wait a minute. Yes, let's see. I have to give you this back again, I guess. Okay. So let's start again. Here's the original. And if you have a copy, it looks just like this, right? You can't spend it in the same way. Okay. But if you have a copy, it looks just the same. And if you went to Somalia, you could probably pass the copy off as real. Okay? The point is, your copy of God means that you will copy the things that he does. It's action. It's the copying of the action. So, if God brings order to the chaos, can you bring order to chaos?
Yeah, by destroying the copy.
You can bring order to chaos, though, right? It's possible for you to go into a chaotic situation and actually bring order to it, isn't it? In fact, if you don't do that, the world turns out to be a real mess for you personally. Okay? So, are you capable of bringing order to chaos? You're shaking your head like, oh my gosh, I can never do that. Okay? You could never do that. You can try, sure. But in fact, I can tell already that you can. You know how I know that? because you got dressed today. And you have jewelry, and you are sitting there listening to this. That's bringing order, right? You could have laid in bed and say, what a mess this world is. I'm not even going to get up. It's not even worth it, right? But you didn't. Can you bring order to chaos? Sure you can. What do you do in your job? What do you do with your children? What do you do in this assembly? You bring order. I don't see people climbing over each other. I don't see somebody, you know what, you should tell her, get out of that seat. That's my seat. I'm going to push you up. No, you don't belong in that chair. Let's create a little disorder, right? No, you're creating order. That means you're doing the same thing that God does. He just does it on a bigger scale, a much bigger scale, right? But you don't have to be exactly like him. You just have to be in his image, which means that you do the actions that he does. So the first thing that we learn is you bring order to the world. When you do that, you're acting like God. You're in his image. What if you don't bring order to the world? What if you bring chaos to the world? Are you in his image? No. Isn't that interesting? That means that there are a whole lot of people there are a whole lot of Homo sapiens on this planet who aren't in God's image when it comes to bringing order, because they go about creating chaos. The people who go about creating chaos are not in God's image, are they? Because God said, let's make Adam, people, in our image. And the first thing that he does is to create order. Okay?
So because it's a storytelling, and Moses told the story, and the mood means chaos.
No, demut means to bring order. Demut means to be an image.
Right, but it was not the same image, it was a copy, correct?
Yes.
Okay, so it's a copy. It also means door chaos. So in the beginning there was chaos. Does it mean in the beginning there were copies, like chaos, people, and he destroyed it and made...
I see what you're saying.
You know,
no,
like
I
the
think
flood
the word
came and then suddenly
Yeah.
he created the
Right.
real image through Noah and
Right,
his...
but the story is that when God began to create things, there was chaos, and doesn't mean that God created copies of chaos. What it means is that whatever God started to create, he took what was there, which was all a chaotic mess, and started to make order from it.
Right, but so what I mean, if it was a chaotic mess, maybe that was before... Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I'm just thinking maybe that was just Moses, and that was before the flood. It was all chaos, and they did things that was not in my image. I destroyed it, and it created...
It could
So,
be that,
that's what I
yes,
was
by the time
thinking.
we get to the flood, he's basically saying, hey, I'm sorry I ever made these people because they're just a mess.
Right.
Okay?
But it almost sounds to me the same thing, just in a shorter version.
But it's
But
not
not?
the same thing,
Okay.
because here we have the Genesis account, which says that when he started to create, right, which is way before the flood, when he started to create, it was chaotic. And he brought other agents into existence in order to deal with the chaos.
Okay, yeah, yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
As Abraham Heschel says, that God started the creation, but it hasn't been finished. It isn't going to be finished until you become active agents in completing the purposes that God had for creation. My point is that if we're going to be in God's image, the first thing that we have to learn is God's image is not about omnipotent, omniscient, omnipresent. It's about creating order. So you can actually do that. Okay? Let's see what else you can actually do. Tselem. Now, we know that to be in God's image is to copy the things that he does. So he creates order. What else does he do?
Make light.
Yeah, well, he doesn't actually make light. He says light, and it became. Okay? So, yes, what else does he do? Besides creating order, I mean, think about the things that God does outside the Genesis account. What else does he do? He forgives. Oh, thank you very much. Can you do that? Really? I mean, you can be in God's image and actually forgive. Okay? You know, forgiveness isn't the same as forgetting. You know that. Okay? Forgive means that I take on the burden as though it were mine and I relieve it from you. It doesn't mean that I just say, oh, well, let's forget about that. Okay? It means that I actually adjust my attitude so that I take on the offense. God does that. So you can do that. What else does he do? He what? He separates light from dark, evil from good, etc., etc. Can you do that? It's called, where's Janice? It's called discernment. No. Is that right? Is that the word? Discerning. It means to choose between. Okay, can you do that? Yeah, what else? He opens one door and closes another? Yeah. I can do that. I can walk right over there and open that door and close another. But the whole point is he gives you choices, and the choices have consequences. And if you understand what God does in terms of choosing and consequences, you can do the same thing. You can create a world where choices have consequences. Right? I'm sorry? Or a new chapter, yes. You can start over again. God starts over again. What else does he do? Come on. He what? He makes a covenant. What is a covenant? A promise. Thank you very much. God makes promises that he keeps. Can you do that? Whoa, who was that was laughing about you can't make a promise, right? It's probably because you were thinking of somebody else who made you a promise and didn't keep it, right? Okay. The point is God makes promises that he keeps, okay? So if you're going to be in God's image, you should keep your promises. What else? Now I'm getting judge, love, compassion. Okay. All right. Thank you very much, because we will now look at verses where God talks about what he does. Okay? But we have to first concentrate on this word. Remember, it's demut and salem. Okay? So it's not just enough to do action. It's not just enough to bring order, forgive, make a promise, etc. The whole point of salem is about purpose. The point of salem is that it's action with a purpose. It's not just action. It's not just creating borders. It's borders with a purpose. What purpose is it? God's. I don't just say, I'm in God's image because I can make one heck of a lot of borders. I can put up rules and fences. I can make people live with their responsibilities. I can punish people for not following through on their promises. That's half of the image. What's the other half of the image? To do it according to God's agenda. To have a purpose behind it. To do it in order to serve God. Right? So I could say, I'm not like those Homo sapiens. I don't bring chaos to the world. I bring order to the world. But if I don't bring order according to God's purposes, I will still not be in his image. Do you understand? If I don't make promises according to his view of what it means to make a promise, I'm still not in his image. If I love, but I don't do it according to his agenda, I'm still not in his image. Because I need both words, demut and salem, to be in his image, right? Now, this tells me something really, really important about me trying to understand why the world is such a mess. And the answer is really simple. It's filled with creatures who are not in the image of God, right? They look like human beings. They think that they're human beings, but according to the Genesis text, they're not acting like God. Therefore, they aren't human. Right? They're Homo sapiens. They're biologically like me, but they have completely different attitudes about why they're there, what they do, what their purposes are, etc., and they don't match up with the Genesis account. Yes? What? It helps me to understand why the world is such a mess. Because if I think the world is filled with 6.5 billion people in God's image, I can't explain all the chaos and all the evil and all the destruction and everything else. But if I understand that there are very few people who are actually in God's image and all the rest of them are just Homo sapiens acting out any way that they want, now it starts to make sense. why the world is such a mess. And it also makes sense why it's so hard to change things. Because I'm not dealing with other human beings. I'm dealing with with creatures that aren't in God's image. And in fact, Jude talks about that. And you know what he says? They're animals. Right? Because they don't operate according to God's image. So I need both these words, tzilim and dumut. Okay? Okay. So, purpose is the theme of Genesis, and in the A&E cultures, the purposes of men was to serve the gods. But in the Hebrew world, the purposes of men is to what? Bring about the rest of the creation according to God's purposes. Okay, now, purpose determines existence. And this is when I need the prop. Oops, sorry. Purpose determines existence. Let's try this. When does a boy become a man? Let's start with that. Let's see. I was in South Africa recently, like not too long ago, some years now. And I was talking to a person from the Maasai culture. Okay? And he told me this really great story about the government of South Africa sent out a population person to count how many people were in the tribe. And after he did all the count, he came to the chief and he said, okay, you've got 170 men, 125 women, 360 children. And the tribal chief said, no, that's not right. He says, what do you mean? I counted them. He says, yeah, but we have 215 men, 111 women, and 456 children. He says, how can that be? He says, what do you think a man is? And he said, a man is married. If you're not married, you're a boy. It doesn't matter what age you are. The population expert was going by age, an artificial government number, and the tribal chief was going by purpose. If you're married, you're a man. If you're not married, you're a boy. You could be 85 years old and be a boy because your wife died, you're not married. Right? Then he discovers something more. And what he discovers is, if you're a man, you're the breadwinner in the home. So, all the women who went out and worked and brought the money back were men. Okay? If the man stayed home, played cards, smoked, hung around we called them, what do we call them? Shadow boys. In Africa, they spend a lot of time on the outsides of the buildings, of the huts. And they move into the shadow as the sun moves. So we call them shadow boys because they keep moving around the building to stay in the shade. No, call them shade boys because they move to the shade, right? Okay? So what the tribal chief says is, you don't understand. If a woman is the one who brings in the money, then in our tribe, she's a man. If a man doesn't bring in the money, then in our tribe, he's a woman. He stays at home. Right? So the population expert went crazy because he's just looking at the ages, and the tribal chief is telling him, no, it has to do with purpose, not age. Okay? So what do we learn? That existence is determined by purpose. You're a boy until you're married. If you get married at 11, you're a man. If you're not married at 92, you're a boy. Okay? Now, let's see if that fits the ancient Near Eastern culture. What is this? Really? Are you sure it's a bottle of water? What is the purpose of a bottle of water? The purpose of a bottle of water is for me to drink. If I don't drink from it, is it a bottle of water? No, it's a plastic container with something inside of it. But it isn't a bottle of water because a bottle of water is what I drink. I had another example, but I don't have the prop. A candle. What do we call a candle? A piece of wax with a wick down it, right? Is it a candle when I haven't lit it? No, it's only a candle when it's lit because then it does what it's supposed to do. Otherwise, you could go into the store and say, sell me a bunch of those wax things with the wick in them. The guy's going to say, a candle. No, it's not a candle until I light it. You want to light them all, then it'll be candles, right? Do you understand? The difference between our view of a bottle of water, where we just describe the physical characteristics, and the Hebrew worldview is it doesn't exist until it serves its purpose. A candle is just wax in a wick until it serves its purpose. Then it's a candle. Okay? Now apply that to me. I don't exist until I serve the purpose. I'm not in God's image until I serve his purpose. In Hebrew thinking, existence depends on purpose. It doesn't matter if it's a machine or a letter of the alphabet or a Homo sapien. Existence determines purpose. So I have to know what it means to have the purposes of God in order for me to have the existence in his image. Okay? So let's take a look and see. Okay. To exist is to do what I was designed to do. So how do I know what I'm supposed to do? And here's the question. What does God do? And for that, you need the two most important verses in the Tanakh, but that might be a little too much. But they're really important verses. Do you know what they are? Hebrews 34:6. Do you know that verse? You didn't memorize it? It's one of the most important verses in the Tanakh. What does it say? It says, the Lord, he's passing by Moses. The Lord. It doesn't have the I am, but that's okay. It's understood in Hebrew. Compassionate what? Well, compassionate, merciful, Hanan, right? Arik apayim, slow to anger, right? Okay, so we're going to look at those because here, this is really important because these are the verses where God defines himself. And if I'm going to be in his image, these are exactly the characteristics that I need to know that God is so that I can see if I'm like them. Okay? Now let's get the backstory. How does this happen? What's the backstory? Well, Moses is feeling really good one day because he just negotiated some stuff with God and, like saving the people. And he said, did you have your hand up? Oh, okay. This is just a reflex action? Okay. So, yes, got it. I know that. I had the same thing over here. Okay. So Moses says, let me see your glory. What does God say? Not such a good idea. Sees my glory usually toast, so let's forget that. But here's what I will do. I will pass by. Remember this? He puts Moses in the cleft of the rock. God passes by, and the scripture says, in King James Version, he saw his back parts. Okay? Well, that's really interesting because God isn't a corporeal being, so how does he see invisible back parts? Right? Okay? Which means that there's some problem with the translation. The word that is used there is the word rachit, a form of the word rachit, and it doesn't mean back. It means behind, right? Which is really interesting because you don't want to say, and he saw God's behind, right? But in fact, what it really means is this. This is so Hebrew. It's really cool. You'll appreciate this. It's from W.H. Wolf. And what he says is this word in Hebrew means what's behind you. And what's behind you in Hebrew is your future. Right? Why? Because you can't see it. You can see the past because all you have to do is look back to see all the, heritage or all the legacy. No, not legacy. All the, the people that from your ancestry, right? But you can't see the future because nobody can see the future. There's no eyes in the back of your head. You don't see what's going to happen next. And so W.H. Wolf says, like a man in a rowboat, right? In order for you to row across a lake and get where you want to go, you don't row like this. You row by looking into the past and lining yourself with up buoy markers and then rowing in a straight line, knowing that the straight line will take you where you want to go without looking at it. Okay? Got that? Makes perfect sense, right? So God passes by and Moses sees behind. What does that mean? Moses sees the future. And what he sees is God birthing the nation of Israel. That's the future. That's what's going to happen. So God lets Moses in on this little glimpse of why it's important for Moses to be negotiating how the children of Israel will survive in the wilderness, because God is birthing a nation. You remember there's that verse where God says to Moses, I want you to act like the wet nurse. And he says, are you kidding me? I don't want to have anything to do with suckling these ridiculous stiff-necked people. And Moses gets really upset when God says you have to be like a mother, right? But God shows Moses what's going to happen in the future. Okay, got it? Real simple, right? Okay, now let's apply it someplace else, and you'll see how startling it is. Let me see. There's that passage in the New Testament where Yeshua says, no man who looks back when he's plowing the field is fit for the kingdom of God. Oh, wait a minute. What did he just say? Christians interpret that as though we look back to see where we have come from. But in Hebrew, it means to look back to see where you are going. Right? If I look back, I'm trying to look into the future. And Yeshua says, no man who puts his hand to the plow and looks back is fit for the kingdom. What does he mean? If you try to look into the future to control it, you're not depending on God, and therefore you're not fit for the kingdom. It's exactly the opposite of what the Christian church thinks it says. Yes?
My question is, so when they plow, are they going like this then?
No, you put
Pulling
two
it
hands
backwards?
on the plow
And pushing
you
forward?
plow forward.
Okay, just wondering.
You plow forward. What he's saying is, if when you're plowing forward, it's a metaphor, right? When you're looking back, he's saying, oh my gosh, you're trying to, now remember, it's Hebrew. To look back is to try to control what's going to happen where you can't see. Yeah, and you won't, just like rowing the boat, you'll get off track. And so what Yeshua is doing is using a Hebrew idiom to explain why people who, once they start plowing for God, start looking over their shoulder to see what's going to happen, are not fit for the kingdom. Why? Because they're no longer trusting that God's going to take care of things. They're trying to control it. Right? Same idea, okay? So that means that, where are we? Exodus 34:6. So now we've got the backstory. Now God goes by. Moses gets this little glimpse of the future, right? Yeshua uses the same idea. And now God says, I'm going to tell you who I am. I'm going to tell you who I am through what I do, because I'm not going to describe my essence. No place in the Bible does it talk about the essence of God. You realize that the words omniscient, omnipotent, omnipresent don't exist in Scripture, right? They're theological words, okay? So God's going to say, here's what I do. And the first thing he says is what? What's the very first description that he uses? Compassionate. Okay? The Hebrew is up there, rahum, or racham. Rahum, okay? Rahum means compassionate. But raham, remember we just changed the vowels, same consonants, okay? Raham means the womb. So, guess what compassion is all about? Compassionate is not just feeling empathetic for somebody. Compassionate is the relationship that exists between an unborn child and the mother. Right? The unborn child is literally totally dependent on the mother. Totally, absolutely dependent. No unborn child can make any decisions of its own. Okay? It's totally dependent. Okay? So if I want to understand compassion, I need to understand the relationship between a fetus and the mother. That's how deep the relationship has to be. Okay? Which means, I'm sorry to say, no man can truly understand what compassion is. At least in the non-woke culture. Okay? No man can understand God's version of compassion. Why do you think there are verses where God calls himself a woman? because he wants people to understand that compassion is like the bond between a fetus and the mother. Okay? And if I as a man try to understand that, the only place I can go to get any kind of even inkling is to somebody who's born a child. Right? I have to know what that was like. So women experientially understand the idea of compassion, but men have to figure it out from the storytelling. Okay? That's really important because God's using something. First, you notice how concrete it is. There's an actual real example existing in the world, and it affects, and that's really also interesting, isn't it? That the first thing that God says about himself is about what a woman experiences. Save me. I thought God was a man. And now I discover that the very first thing he says about who he is built on a relationship between a woman and a child. I guess I might have to rethink that passage about the creation of woman in Genesis chapter 2. Okay? So, we got it. Compassionate. What's the next thing? Oh, by the way, can you be compassionate like God? Sure, and it better start with your child, right? I mean, I can get some appreciation for that, but you know it from the inside out, okay? Which is another reason why I better listen to you, because you have a deep connection to God that I can't even have, okay? Next, Hanan, right? Hanan comes from the word hen, and it means what? Heartfelt response to someone in need. Okay, now why is this important? Because it doesn't require that you have any relationship to the person at all. You just see someone in need, right? Compassion means there has to be a relationship. There has to be a deep personal bond. But Hanan doesn't require that. Hanan just says, I see somebody in need and I do something about it. Right? That's all. So the first thing God says, deep personal bond. The second thing is somebody in need who needs help. That's all. Somebody on the side of the road with a flat tire, stop and help them change it. Somebody who, is experienced a disaster. I have no idea who they are, but I send money anyway. Right? Somebody who just has a need, like my kids under the bridge in Jakarta. Right? I don't know them. I just know that they are the products of prostitutes and nobody wants them. I mean, the prostitute mother does, of course, but nobody else wants them and they don't care about them. They treat them like trash, literally. Right? They would just as soon sweep them up and dump them in the garbage. But they're little kids, so I have to do something about it because I know about that. So I did something about it. Okay? That's Hanan. No connections, no reciprocity. I don't expect anything back from them, but that's exactly what God says he's like. He meets people's needs. He doesn't expect anything back at all, right? So personal bond, deep personal bond, meeting somebody's needs, okay? What else? Oh, and by the way, can you do those things? Sure you can. So you're still in God's image. Isn't that nice? Okay. Let's try another one. Erik apayim. Erik apayim literally means long nose. Okay? It means God has a long nose. Right? Why? Because when he gets angry, he takes a deep breath. A long nose takes a deep breath. And that means he slows down his anger so that it dissipates. Okay? Erik apayim is the idiom, the Hebrew idiom for slow to anger. But it literally means a long nose. Okay, so you got the picture now? God is a pregnant woman who's pouring out wine for the person who's thirsty with a long Jewish nose. Okay, got it? You could draw a picture of this and you get it all. I'm finished, there's more. Okay? Notice that anger is not in God's image. Slow to anger is in God's image. How long did it take for God to get angry about Israel not obeying the Torah commandments at Sinai? 1,000 years. I guess he had a really slow breath or a very long nose. Okay? So, people who, quote unquote, fly off the handle are not in God's image. People who have a short fuse are not in God's image. People who take their time, calm. We have idioms about this. Count to 10. Take a deep breath, right? I see you're getting really upset. Take a deep breath. It's Hebrew, right? We just have built it into our English idioms, but it's being in God's image, okay? Let's see what else. Rav Chesed. I'm not going to talk about Hesed. I'm just going to tell you that Rav means great. So whatever this is, God has a lot of it. Okay? We'll find out in a minute. Emet, true. But true isn't the same as truth. You know what true means? I'm going to see if I can do this. I don't know, my leg is pretty bad. I'm going to try. This is what true means. Reliable. I can stand on it. It isn't going to collapse under me, right? It's reliable. It's trustworthy. It doesn't mean truth, like perfectly correct. You know, when you get 100% on your exam in the 8th grade vocabulary test, you got everything correct. God doesn't ask you to get everything correct. He asks you to trust that you can stand on Him. Okay? So what does that mean for us? It means that what you say counts. You want people to be able to trust you, to stand on your word, to know that you're reliable, that you follow through. If you do that, you're in God's image. And by the way, that brings order to the world, doesn't it? Yes. Right? The more trustworthy you are, the more order you bring to the world. So I guess you're doing all these really godly things, okay? Let's try the next one. We'll get back to Hesed in a minute. Exodus 34:7. Keeping Hesed for 1,000. Wait a minute. We just had Hesed. God never uses the same word twice unless it has real, deep meaning. Right? And yet, in these two verses, he uses the word Hesed twice, which means we better know what that word means. Okay? We haven't got there, but we will. Nasa. This is really easy. It's NASA, and it means to carry off. What do you know? God was in the rocket business long time before we came up with it. Okay? This is what it means, nasa, and it means to carry off. But it doesn't mean to carry some, satellite off. It means to carry off a burden. And in this case, it means to carry off the burden of sin. Okay? To carry it away. All right, so here we go. Who's my victim? Here we go. I want you to carry this off. What will you have to do? I'm holding it. What do you have to do to carry it off?
Reach out and take it.
Yeah. Great. She just lifted the burden of sin off of me. Where is it? On her. See, you thought that carrying off the burden of sin meant that it disappeared. We threw it away. But what it actually means is to pass the burden to someone else. Right? In this case, God says, I'm willing to carry off, to take away your burden of sin. And now he's going to tell you what kinds of sins, because there's 3 words for it. Okay? But the point is, it doesn't go away. It just gets passed to somebody else. Okay? So now, I've made lots of mistakes in my life, and I go to Pat and I say, man, Pat, I need you to forgive me for this. And Pat says, no way. I'm not going to take that burden off of you. Right? He's being one of the Homo sapiens in the world. Okay? If he says, yes, I accept your forgiveness and I will take that burden from you, now he gets to carry it. How can he do that? Because he has a God who will take it from him. That's the only reason you can do it. Otherwise, you're going to carry the burden of someone else. Wow, what do you know? Forgive us our sins as we forgive others. It's the same thing, right? Pass the burden on. And ultimately, someone will pass it to God so that none of us carry it. But it doesn't mean that you forget about it. It doesn't mean that you pretend it didn't happen. It doesn't mean that it just doesn't matter. It means that you take that burden on because you know that God will lift it from your heart. But you got to take it first. That's hard. That's tough love. That's hard forgiveness because it isn't just excusing it. It's saying it's like you did it to me. Okay? So apply that to if you do it to the least of these. Now, that sounds like a positive commandment. Now let's do the negative side. If you forgive the least of these, you take on that burden. Okay? You got a question?
Yeah, John 20, where Jesus says to the disciples, as I give you the ability to forgive others.
Well, he
Apply
says,
that here.
he basically says, I give you the ability to not forgive, but to take on, what's the, I can't remember. What? Remit the
sins that you remit are remitted. The sins
Yeah.
you forgive are forgiven.
Yeah,
The
so-
sins you don't forgive are not forgiven.
That's right, yeah. So he gives it both ways. He says, if you forgive, then they will be forgiven. If you don't forgive them, then they will not be forgiven. And what he means, of course, is that the power that he was given by the Father in his capacity as the Messiah, he now passes to his disciples so that they can act in the same way that he acted, right? So, what does that mean? They recognized, look at the guy who gets lowered through the roof. What does he say? Your sins are forgiven. What do the rabbis say? You can't do that. Only God can do that, right? And of course, the Trinitarians want to use that as an example of why Jesus is God, because he can forgive sins, but they don't pay attention to what he actually says. And what does he say? The Son of Man has been given power on earth to do this, which means I've been given the authority while I'm the Messiah to act as God would act. And now Yeshua passes that authority on to his disciples to act as God would act. It doesn't mean that they now inherently have papal status. It means that they now have the same authority that the Messiah had passed to them to act as God would act. Right? Yes, ma'am.
So we as followers of Yah, of course, can forgive, and then we can pass on to him, correct? But then, Homo sapiens who say, I forgive you, but they cannot pass it on because they don't have that faith. They carry it, and they get more bitter and bitter because they carry the burden.
What do you know? You know something about bitterness? About the inability to actually forgive because you have nowhere to pass the burden?
Right.
About the resentment that comes from all that? What does Scripture say?
Yeah.
You take on the burden, but the only reason you can take it on is because you're acting in God's image, and God is the one who gives the authority to do that, so ultimately you pass it on to God, and it's relieved from you because I forgave you, and it's relieved from me because I trust that God will do that.
So as a follower of him, if we ask an unbeliever, hey, forgive me, and they say yes, but it doesn't mean anything then probably, because they cannot pass, so they're still carrying it, right?
It doesn't mean that they're going to carry the burden because they don't understand the connection, right? You can still ask for forgiveness, and you should, but they don't carry the burden in the same way that you understand it.
Right, so they're still carrying it.
Yeah, well, maybe. I don't know how unbelievers think about that stuff, right? I don't know what the consequences are, but I do know that when we're talking about image of God, the only way it works is because you have a God who actually forgives you. Okay? All right, so we're not done. Okay, let's see what kinds of things he takes away. And the first one is awan, which means to be twisted, bent. Okay? Do you know people who are twisted and bent? I do. And God says, those people are not outside of the reach of forgiveness. Okay? That's the first thing, twisted and bent. What's the second thing? The second thing is pisha, which means that they're rebellious. There's a difference between twisted and bent, which is a character defect, and rebellious, which is a choice defect, right? So you might know some people who just, their lives are just a mess. They just don't have the right attitude, okay? They're not the same people as the ones who just deliberately do really evil things, okay? And God says, I can take care of the twisted and bent. I can take care of those who are in rebellion. And I can take care of those who sin. Now, why isn't twisted and bent and rebellion sin? Why does he use a separate word, chata, for sin? Because sin is not an ethical word. It's a religious word. You only can sin in violation of a command that God gave. And if you don't acknowledge the commandments, you can't sin because it's a religious word, right? I can be bent in my character because I don't fit into society. I can be rebellious because I act up, but I can't sin until there's a standard by which I govern behavior, right? So to sin means that I acknowledge that there is a religious standard, a divine command giver, and I have offended him, right? So Homo sapiens who don't have a God can be bent and can be twisted, and they can do unethical things, but it's not the same as sin because sin requires a religious world, right? Makes sense? Anyway, fortunately, God is writing to Jews, and they know what he's talking about, and he says, I can take care of all of that. So now that means you, if you're going to be in God's image, have to do the same thing. You have to deal with the bent people, you have to deal with the rebellious people, and you have to deal with the people who act in unethical ways. Okay? So let's look at the rest. By no means clearing the guilty. So it would be great if God said, I just forgive. But the fact of the matter is, something has to happen to the bad people, right? So God says, hey, I'm not going to just remove all the consequences. By no means clearing the guilty. And now we have this really odd word. Really odd because it's been so misunderstood. Remember the verse? Visiting the iniquity of the fathers on the children and the children's children to the third and fourth generation. Remember that? Okay, so let me ask you. What was the first thing God said about himself? The first thing he says, I'm a pregnant woman. Okay? Compassion. Okay? Now, the God who describes the very first thing about himself as compassion now comes around and says, but I'm going to get even with those people. Does that sound like compassion to you? No. So the problem is the word pechad, which, as you can see up there from the Theological Word Book of the Old Testament, is one of the most difficult words to translate in Hebrew because it doesn't mean what we think it means today. We think visiting the iniquity means passing on the guilt, right? But pechad means visiting in the Old English sense, which means to observe, to come to see, right? So what God says is, I'm going to oversee the iniquities of the father to the third and fourth generation. That means 4 generations since the person was rebellious, bent, and sinful, I'm watching over to make sure that it doesn't turn out to be as bad as it could, right? I'm caring for the children for 4 generations. Wow. The compassionate God who knows that there's iniquity in the world and that there are evil men says, those kids, I'm going to watch over them to make sure that all the consequences that could have happened to them from all the evil things that their fathers did don't all happen. Some of them will, some of them you can't avoid because it's human. But everything bad that could have happened doesn't happen because God promises to watch over them. Yes? The microphone. Do you see how important it is to understand this word? Because otherwise you think God is a vindictive, judge, and he's going to get even with you. But in fact, if you understand the word correctly, you will notice that the compassionate God has compassion over the children of men who have been really bad. Okay?
This ties into a question that we've had for ages. And that is in Isaiah, and then quoted again in Matthew, it talks about Yeshua that a smoldering wick he will not put out, or a bruised reed he will not break off. But then in Mark, it talks about he sees a fig tree who it wasn't even the season for it to bear fruit, and he cursed it. And then the next day it's all dead and shriveled up. So I'm sorry, but this just brings to our mind, okay, he's compassionate. What in the world went on there? Can you just explain that too?
Okay, let's talk about the fig tree. The fig tree is a real clear example of Hebrew. It wasn't fulfilling its purpose, was it? There were no figs. Oh, really? But it had leaves and it wasn't producing any fruit. And it's a metaphor, right? He uses it as a metaphor to say, okay, what's the point of a tree, you, who looks like it's a fig tree and has leaves, but it's not bearing any fruit, right? That's the point of the metaphor. It's a, what is the right? It's a, what do they call that? It's some kind of illustration that teachers use. What is it called? Yeah. It's like the flannel board when you put the thing up there and it says, okay, here's the tree. You know, it's an illustration of his point about purpose. So don't take the verse by itself. Look at the whole context of the story. What's happening with the disciples? What are they talking about? What were the issues that they were dealing with? It's not just isolated. It has everything to do with all of the history around it and why he does that, so that he will make a point to the disciples. Okay? So that's the fig tree. The Isaiah passage, he won't won't put out a smoldering wick, won't bruise a reed. Well, what is that about? If a person is like, if you said, this is a character description, you know, I know, what's your name? I know her. She's so gentle and peaceful. Is it, you'll have to vouch for this, though. She's so gentle and peaceful that she wouldn't put out a smoldering wick or bruise a reed. Now, those are Hebrew idioms, but we have other ones. That she wouldn't harm a fly. Okay, we use that. Same idea. What does it mean? She has a gentle, peaceful spirit about her, so that I know that she's really good in her heart. No different than the Hebrew idiom, not pulled out a smoldering wick or bruise a reed. That's all. Okay? But what?
It didn't seem like that in Mark.
It doesn't seem like that in Mark because he curses the fig tree. Right. But he curses the fig tree because the fig tree is an illustration of not fulfilling its purpose. Right? So here we are. Here we have this woman who looks like she wouldn't harm a fly. But then we find out that she's not fulfilling any of the purposes that God has for her, because she turns out to be an evil bitch at home. And she beats up on him all the time by basically saying, look, God put me in charge because he created me last. I'm the coup de grace of the whole thing, right? And then we say, oh my gosh, she's like the fig tree. She looks good, but, right?
I don't have anything to say.
No, what you have to say is, I'm created in God's image, and I'm compassionate, long-suffering, slow to anger. I have Rav Chesed, which you're going to find out next, right? And he's going to vouch for it, because if he doesn't, you're going to make it very brutal for him at home, right? No. Oh, okay. All right. Okay. So do you see why we have to understand? Oh, another question. Okay. How can
the fig tree be an allegory or an illustration if we find out later that it was shriveled?
Yeah, it didn't fulfill its purpose, so it's out of existence.
Yeah, but the disciples noticed that it was shriveled. So you're saying it's an illustration, but it was real.
Yeah, he took a real circumstance and made an illustration out of it. I don't understand the question. Because, look, okay, so I'm trying to teach my son that he has to be really careful when he drives. Okay? So I take him to the I take him to the wrecking yard and I show him cars that have been smashed up and people were killed in. That's a real illustration of a point that I'm trying to make. Right? A shriveled fig tree is a real illustration of a point I'm trying to make. Right? Okay. Yes, dear.
I'm sorry. So the fig tree got shriveled up after he saw that it was not producing fruit. And a fig tree, if you see its leaves, it will produce fruit. It's already produced fruit. The tree's leaves and the fruit come out together.
Right.
And so there were leaves but no fruit. It didn't serve its purpose.
Right. Didn't fulfill its purpose. Okay? Can we go past the fig tree now? Okay. One more question on the fig tree? Okay.
No, this is circling back to Pekad.
Pekad.
And what popped into my head was the exercise, oversight, action that produces great change, both to punish and benefit. Korah. Korah was obviously swallowed up, but his sons went on to write some of the Psalms.
Yeah, at least we think so, because it says
Sons of
this is the
Korah.
Psalm of Korah. Right. Okay. All right. Let's try the next one, because we're getting to interesting stuff now. And that's chesed. Remember, this word is used twice. So that means it's doubly important for understanding who God is. And more important than that is it has no ancient language cognates. What does that mean? It means that there are no other similar words in other ancient Semitic languages. Chesed is an entirely Hebrew word. Okay? So now I have a real interesting question for you. If it's entirely Hebrew, where did it come from? He didn't borrow it from Egyptian. He didn't borrow it from Phoenician. He didn't get it from the Canaanites. He didn't get it from the Sumerians. Where did he get it? You mean God actually gave Moses a Hebrew word with a very deep meaning that only applies to the Hebrew understanding of God? And I would say yes. Yeah. So I guess we really need to know what this word is, because it's the unique Hebrew word about God. Okay? So let's go take a look. Etymology. No obvious A&E, ancient Near Eastern cognates. The Septuagint uses Elios and its derivatives 221 times, dikaiosune 8 times, charis twice, 7 other Greek words 1 time each, and no translation at all in 6 cases, which should tell you something really important. The rabbis had no idea how to deal with this in Greek. They just didn't. Why? Because it doesn't have an English or Greek equivalent. Right? It's a word in Hebrew that only makes sense in Hebrew. So now let's go see why it's so unusual. Oh, you see the NASB and the Darby translated as loving kindness. King James and New King James, mercy. Unfailing love, NLT, NIV. Steadfast love, ESV, RSV. Kindness in Young's literal. So you can see English has the same problem, right? They just don't know what to do with this word. Okay? So let's find out why. The first, that's because in Hebrew, chesed means 4 things all at once. And the first thing it means is relational. In other words, you only have chesed when you have some kind of relation between the two persons. Okay? You have to have a covenant, you have to have a blood tie, you have to have some kind of relationship, a tribe, a kingdom, and a servant, something. There has to be some connection. Okay? It's not like, remember, Hanan, where I see someone's need and I just fulfill it. Okay? Chesed means before it can happen, there has to be a relationship. Okay? So, yeah, perfect. I don't know you at all. We've never met. We've never shaken hands. Did you ever tell me your name?
We met at Art's house.
We met at Art's house. Oh my gosh, that's right.
Yeah.
Okay, sorry, you won't work. How about you?
How about me?
How about you? Have I ever met you before?
No.
No, sir.
Do I know your name now?
I don't think so.
No, I don't. I don't know your name. Okay, that means we're complete strangers, which means that you and I cannot have Hesed.
Good.
Okay? Do you see how it works? I have to have at least some connection in order for Hesed to apply. Okay? Now this is really important because remember Hanan doesn't require any connection at all. If I see that you're in trouble, I see you're in trouble, I do something about it. But it doesn't mean that I expect anything back or that we have any connection at all. Okay? God says Hanan is his second most important characteristic, which means that he does for people without expecting anything back, simply because they're in need. Okay? But that does not qualify them for Hesed, because Hesed requires a relationship. Okay? Which means that God can do good things for even bad people without them being part of the kingdom, because they're not connected to him. They just call forth his compassion. Okay? But once we're connected, other things happen. And the first thing is the connection. And the second thing is that the connection requires reciprocal action. So, if God does something for you and you have a relationship with him, you are required to do something for him. This is the biblical IOU. It's simple. God does something for you, you have to do something for God. Okay? You have a need, God fulfills it. Now you have to fulfill God's need. Does God have any needs? Does God need anything from you? What can you possibly give to God that he doesn't already have? Faith? God has plenty of faith. He just... Thank you. The only thing that God doesn't have, which only you can give him, is obedience. Right? So God does something for you. He meets your need. He establishes a relationship. He connects with your name. He shows you compassion. Guess what? Chesed requires obedience. Right? In other words, the law doesn't come free, and neither does grace. If grace shows up in your life, you have a relationship with God that's been established by him or you. You now owe him obedience. You owe it to him. It's not optional. Right? This is where the Christian church makes a huge mistake, because they think that obedience is optional. But it's not. It's only optional if I don't have a relationship. Yes, sir.
So since obedience is discouraged or taught against, called legalism, what's the consequence?
The consequence is a whole lot of people who think that they have a relationship with God, but they're living off of Hanan, God's willingness to give them grace in spite of the fact that there's no relationship there.
That's sad.
Oh, it's a tragedy. It's horrible. And what's really horrible is that the church teaches it.
Absolutely. So that's maybe another definition of lawlessness?
Yeah, law in Greek, lawlessness is antinomia.
Yes.
What does antinomia mean?
Anti-law.
Nomos is the word for law.
Yeah.
And how is nomos translated into Hebrew? Torah.
Yeah, anti-Torah.
Anti-Torah is lawlessness. Anti-Torah is lack of obedience, which means that I reject the relationship of chesed that God offers because I don't fulfill my part of it.
Gets really
I
strong.
Say, okay, God, I'm glad to do that, but I'm not going to fulfill the IOU.
Yeah.
Right.
And that's where we have all came from.
Yeah. Well, most of us came out of that environment. Yeah.
Yeah.
Because guess what? We inherited Martin Luther and the boys. And Martin Luther and the boys taught that law and grace were polar opposites. But what we know now is grace requires law.
Law and grace.
Yep.
Absolutely.
Yep. Okay? So the real tragedy is that there are lots and lots of, the tragedy is that there are lots of people who call themselves Christians who don't understand that chesed depends on an IOU with God. The real blessing is that God cares anyway. Right? If he didn't, none of us would be here.
So I just wanted to ask concerning law versus grace. Wouldn't grace be considered the enabling so you can carry out the law?
I'll tell you what, I'm going to defer that question to a nice seminar called Law and Grace.
Oh, all right.
Okay? And if you really want to know before we get there, then you'll have to go to my website and get the seminar, Law and Grace, because it's really more complicated than that. But you're on the right track. Grace and law fit together. They have a reciprocal relationship. Just it isn't quite as simple as one facilitates the other. Okay? So let's talk about this. We're still talking about chesed, remember? The third characteristic of chesed is that it's transitive. Okay, so let me show you what that means. Do you have a question over here? No, good. Okay, this is transitive. Esther, I know that you're in real trouble with your rent this month, and I want to help you. Okay? You just accepted that from me, which means you and I have a relationship, and you now owe me that money. Yeah, you do, because that's the IOU, chesed. Okay? And in fact, if you refuse to repay me, then the relationship ends. Okay? So because that's then you don't want it. Because sometime you'll have to pay me back. Not now, but when I'm in need, you'll have to pay me back. But transitive says that she also has a need, and so you need to offer her. Okay? Now, she accepts it, which means that she owes you, and you owe me. But transitive says that she needs to pass it on to someone else. So, okay, he likes that. And if he decides to keep it, guess what happens? Here, let me tell you what. No, you don't give it back to me yet. Not yet. Okay. Here's what happens. Remember the parable of the great debtor. He comes to the king. He only owes him 37 trillion. And he says, just give me some more time and I'll figure it out. I need to go to the Fed and print more money. Okay? So the king, knowing that he can never pay off the debt, forgives him. Okay? Forgives him the whole debt. Then the guy goes out and he runs into somebody that he knows on the street. Okay? And the guy owes him $10. What does he say? He says, pay me right now. And the guy says, just give me a little more time and I'll pay you. Does he forgive him? No, he has him thrown into debtor's prison because he didn't pay the $10. What does the king do when he hears this? What does he do when he hears that the man didn't forgive after he was forgiven? He withdraws his forgiveness. He insists that the guy pay the 37 trillion, and when he can't, he throws him in prison, and basically that's an execution sentence because he'll never be able to pay it, okay? So notice that this is a parable about the kingdom, which means it's a parable about the character of God. And what does it say? If you refuse to pass on the blessing that you were given, God will take it back. Ooh, that's serious stuff, okay? So that's the beginning of transitive. It means that once you're in a relationship with God and you accept his forgiveness, you owe him obedience and you owe God the ability to pass on the blessing that you had to someone else who then, because they can refuse, no problem, end of story. But if they accept it, then they encounter relationship, reciprocity, and transitivity, right? They have to do the same thing, okay? Now remember the parable where Yeshua says, as a member of the kingdom, you're going to have 100 houses, 100 wives, 100 all this. Remember that? You're going to have 100-fold, right? Remember that? What's the one person that he leaves out of the 100-fold? The father. There's only one father, but there can be 100 mothers, 100 houses, 100 on. Why does he say that? Because the blessing that you pass on from the Father will touch 100 lives before it comes back to you. So you will have 100 mothers because your blessing has been passed to 100 mothers before it comes back to you. Your blessing has been passed to 100 households before it comes back to you. One father who started the whole thing, but once you start that chain, it's going to go, and if we did this right, Dave would pass it on, to go around the whole room, everybody would be blessed, and then ultimately it'd come back to Gail, and she'd give it back to me, and I would say, my blessing just touched everybody here, right? So over the course of time, when you bless someone, and they understand chesed, they will pass that blessing to someone else, and they will pass it and pass it and pass it and pass it, and everybody will be treated with a blessing that you started. And someday, it will come back to you. We have one back here first. Yes, ma'am.
If you refuse to pass on...
I can't hear you.
If you refuse
can't hear you.
to pass on the blessing...
It's a sign. Go
It's
ahead.
a sign. Well, what does it mean about God gives gifts without repentance? Is that separate from the...
God gives gifts without repentance? That sounds like Hanan to me. God gives without expecting reciprocity, right? Because it's not based on relationship, it's based on God's goodness, okay? But if there's reciprocity, there's also transitivity. We're not done. We've only talked about 3 of the things for Hesed. Could it get any worse? Yes, just wait, okay?
I just didn't catch everything, and it was really profound when you said it, talking about transitive. If you refuse to pass on the blessing you were given, and I missed...
Then God withdraws the blessing
that's what I thought you
because
said.
you have broken the chain of the requirements of Chesed, right? So don't think that God forgave you forever. He forgives you as long as you keep forgiving. What does Yeshua say? If you come to the altar and there's something that you have with somebody, don't stop right there. Don't go any further because now you will create a problem with chesed. Go back and take care of it. Right? And he doesn't say, go back and make sure that the other person forgives you because it doesn't matter what the other person does. It matters what you do. Okay? Okay, you can see it's built in. Yeshua's understanding of chesed is built into his examples and his illustrations for how these people are to behave. Okay, last one. Last part. Okay, last one. What does it say? It says action, right? Yeah. Act. That means I know that you're having lots of trouble and I'm sympathetic and I'll pray for you. No skin off of me. You needed $100 for rent, and I said, oh my gosh, I know you're really in trouble. I'll pray for you. But it was within my power to actually do something about it. I just didn't because I converted it into a spiritual act instead of an actual physical helping you. Okay? So the point of chesed is that it's active. It's not mental. It's, I have a deep feeling in my heart for you. It's, I'm going to do something about this because I can. If you need 100 and I only had 20, I still have 20, right? Whatever I can do, I need to do. That's what chesed is about. It's about a relationship that I have with you. It's about the reciprocity that will occur when you accept my gift to you, okay? It's about the transitivity that you owe to somebody else to pass the blessing on. And it's about active things, doing something, not just saying it. Okay? Got it?
Have a break?
Yes, we can have a break and we can pray for this family again. Because we can do something. Right? So don't let Art's prayer become your prayer. Do something. Pray yourself for this family, because chesed requires that you be active in this, right? You have a relationship with these people. Do what God would do. Okay, so let's see if we can finish this up. Oh. Oh, we didn't finish with with being human, but we're getting close. Okay? So, none of these capture the idea. There it is, relational, reciprocity, transitivity, and active. And what does that mean? It means relational, proposes existing member of a community. It means reciprocal, an IOU. It means transitive, you have to pass it on. It means active, you do something about it if you can, or whatever you can. Ruth and Rahab both show the meaning of chesed in a pagan, non-Israel environment, right? Remember, Ruth is from what tribe? Moab, so she's not even supposed to be there, right? Doesn't the Torah say, no Moabite shall come into the household of Israel for 10 generations? That's essentially saying never, okay? So Ruth, by the way, the word chesed is used in Ruth over and over to remind you that if you really want to know what chesed means, look at Ruth. And what does Ruth do? She sacrifices everything for Naomi, who doesn't even want her there. Oh, you thought Naomi was the great mother-in-law who just had a heart of gold. Sorry. When you start reading the text for what it actually says, Naomi does everything to basically destroy or put Ruth in a high-risk position where she might be stoned, where he doesn't want to have anything to do with her because Naomi is convinced that God is punishing her for the loss of her two, and in Hebrew it says her two little boys. Of course, they were adult men. Right? Okay? As far as she's concerned, she's the mother, and they're her little boys. And Ruth and Oprah are the ones who get in the way because they married Moabite women and so on and on and on, right? You know, that kind of stuff. So that story will really help you understand what chesed is about. Boaz uses the term, okay? By the way, just to make sure that you understand how important it is that it be active, remember when Boaz first meets Ruth in the field. He says, I've heard about your chesed toward Naomi, and I want you to know that God will bless you. Okay? That's great. Oh, my heart goes out to you, Ruth. I just want God to bless you. No, that's not what Boaz does. He says, I want God to bless you, my daughter. And then he turns right around and gives her the food. So he fulfills the very prayer that he had for God to do because he can. He shows chesed by doing what he can do, right? Okay. And you notice he also says, and I want you to walk right behind the men. And then he goes to the men and says, leave her alone. Which means that she was in danger being out in the field, a Moabite woman without an attached man to protect her in a field full of reaper men. The implications are there, right? So Boaz makes sure that she gets protected. Okay, let's talk about Rahab. Rahab, how does she demonstrate chesed? Okay, remember what she says? I have shown you favor. Remember when she hides the spies? Now you show me favor. In other words, reciprocity. I did something for you. You do something for me. Okay? And Rahab is really interesting because where's Rahab from? What city? Jericho, right? Let's see. Do the people in Jericho speak Hebrew? I don't think so. There hasn't been a Hebrew in the land for a long time. They've been down in Egypt in captivity, right? So how does Rahab know that the God of Israel has given them the land, that chesed means reciprocity, that she can use it to negotiate what she needs, right? How does she know that stuff? Really? Do you think so? Here's what I think. She's a prostitute. Pillow talk. People travel, right? How do you think these guys get into the city? Does Jericho not know that there's an army of 1 million people coming? Right? Why would they ever let two strangers into the city? It's real clear to me. The two guys show up and say, hey, we heard about Rahab. Oh, yeah, tax money. Right? So they let them in. Right? Otherwise, it'd be stupid to let two guys in that clearly they could. And what does the chief, the king of Jericho, say when he hears about this? You idiots! Don't you know those guys are spies? We got to go get them right now. Okay? You see, you have to start thinking of this as a human story. Okay? Right. What's really interesting is that in the first part of the story, they're described as Joshua sends two men. When they return, it says, and the two messengers returned. And messengers is the same word that's used for angels. So, were they men or were they angels? A lot of interesting things going on there. But the point with Chesed is that Rahab knows that Chesed requires active reciprocity, IOU, all that kind of stuff, and she uses that to save her family. Okay? Got it? So you want to read those two stories if you want to understand the context of Chesed in the Old Testament. And then, of course, we know that Yeshua uses Chesed because he quotes from verses that involve Chesed. Okay? So let's see what's next. Oh, there you go. Did you like that? That was cool. Legal boundaries, ethnic boundaries, and religious boundaries. Just in case you don't understand what Ruth is always okay, so Ruth, the story of Ruth is not about Ruth. I wish we could do a whole thing on Ruth. That would be really fun. But if we did, you'd discover that the story of Ruth is not about Ruth at all. It's about the restoration of Naomi, because Naomi is the one who comes back and doesn't believe that God is good. Right? What does she say? God has punished me. Right? Don't call me Naomi, call me bitterness, because God has punished me. Okay? And one of the punishments is I have to drag this Moabite along with me. Okay? But the whole point is that from that point on, she starts doing things to get rid of Ruth. And Ruth just keeps hanging in there. Chesed. She doesn't give up, okay? So, what is the story of Naomi really about? Well, in order to understand that story, you have to know something about the history. Where does Ruth come from? Moab. Where did Moab start? Lot started Moab by himself? What? Oh, in other words, Moab started with an ancestral relationship between the father and both daughters. And the reason that Moabites are not allowed to enter into the house of Israel is because of the sexual scandal that started the tribe, right? Lot and his two daughters. Okay? Great, we got that. So Ruth is not supposed to be there because she's a Moabite, because she came from this really scandalous background. What about Boaz? Where does he come from? What's the ancestry of Boaz? Judah and Tamar. What? So, Ruth comes from a sexual scandal. Boaz comes from a sexual scandal. How did the sexual scandal even start? Because Lot and Abraham disagreed and they separated. And what we discover is something really, really powerful. Chesed heals a wound in the family that happened generations before. The division of Abraham and Lot. Chesed, through Ruth, heals that because the two sides of the family, Judah and the relationship with Lot and his daughters, come back together and become one and become the heritage, the lineage of Yeshua, of David and of Yeshua, right? So isn't it interesting that Chesed is so powerful that it can heal generational splits? Do you see that? So the story of Ruth isn't about Ruth. The story of Ruth is about Naomi, and the story of Ruth is about Lot and Abraham. Right? Amazing, huh? So we should do Ruth sometime, because then you see all these little hints and stuff that's going on through the whole thing that all has to do with this long history. Okay? Chesed, really, really powerful stuff. Okay. Whoop. Chesed in life. Unto the least of these. That's a Chesed problem, isn't it? Because it says, just because a person is in need, you have to do something. If you have Chesed, do something about it. Okay? Bearing burdens without compensation. Right? As we are one. All this stuff is about relational things. So Chesed is a theme that runs all the way through the apostolic writings as well. And finally, Ish. The meaning of Ish. So if you look in the lexicons, you will find that the word Ish in Hebrew is almost universally translated as man. Okay? There's some interesting things about how that happens, which, do I have time? Yeah, no? Yeah, I have time. Okay. So which I'll tell you about. But let's just start with this. David Stern did a study of the uses of ish in the Tanakh. It was like 2,900 and something uses of it. And what he discovered is that something around 90% of the time it doesn't mean man at all. What? It's translated man over and over and over, thousands of times. Why can't it mean man? Because what he discovered is that it means the relationships that make up the being of a person. So, an ish is the summary of all the relationships that make me who I am. Right? So, I'm a man because I have a wife, because I have children, because I belong to a tribe, because I belong to a nation, because I have a covenant, because I have a God, etc., etc. All those things make me who I am. My identity is tied to all of those. My identity has nothing to do with being born a Homo sapien with arms, legs, cognitive functioning, etc., etc. Okay? The image of God is, remember, purpose and action. So, all the things that give me purpose and action are who I am. That means if I take away some of those things, I diminish who I am. Okay? The more independent I become, the less human I am. Did you get that? If I say, I don't need the relationship with that guy, he's a pain in my ass, it bothers me a lot, I just get rid of him. Right? Okay? If I get rid of him, my relationship diminishes. If I disown somebody, my relationship diminishes. If I remove myself from my political, social environment, my relationship diminishes. When I met somebody who's off-grid. If I decide that living off-grid will protect me from the world because I'm away from everyone, I stop being ish, which means that the more dependent I am, the more human I become. Okay? Right? I mean, it's really tempting. There's lots of times when I feel like, the hell with all this, I just go live on an island someplace in the Philippines and enjoy the sunshine and the beach, right? But when I think like that, I also have to realize that from God's perspective, I'm becoming less human. Okay? Remember what Yeshua prays? The worst thing he could ever pray. Father, don't take them out of the world. I mean, that's what we all want, right? Oh, Messiah, please come back because I just can't take it anymore and rescue me and get me out of here. And Yeshua, the Messiah, is praying, don't take them out of the world. I want them here. Wait a minute. I thought we were supposed to get out and go to heaven. No, that's not the perspective. The perspective is you belong here. This is where you're going to be. Get used to it. Okay? Become a force for God here. Okay? So, ish means all the relationships. Now, let's think about where is the first occurrence of the word ish in Scripture? Oh, is there a question back there? I'm sorry, don't have time for questions right now. Okay? Hang on to the question unless it's absolutely burning in your heart and you absolutely have to have the answer, in which case you'd be very Greek. Okay? Okay. What's the question? I'm just giving you a bad time.
I'm really curious about the connection between covenant and Hadassah.
Yeah, covenant and hesed. Okay? So what is covenant?
Agreement between two people.
Yeah, exactly. It's a contract. And it has obligations on both sides, reciprocity. And it has transitivity. It means that it isn't just for you. A covenant is for, what does Moses say? And these things are for you and the generations, right? Okay? So it's got transitivity. Is covenant active? You can just say, hey, look, I signed the papers a long time ago. I'm good. Right? I'm good to go. The contract it's registered with the city. It's fine. No, the covenant is active. You have to do something. And the covenant is made up of obedience, isn't it?
Yep.
So the covenant is an expression of chesed. It's only one of the kinds of expressions of chesed, but an important one. Okay? Good enough? Okay, cool. Let's go back to Ish. Okay? So where's the first occurrence of Ish? The first occurrence in the Bible. Genesis what? Genesis 2 what? Whatever, it's in there, Genesis 2 someplace, right? No, it's in the place where Adam says, she shall be called Isha because she comes from Ish, right? She shall be called woman because she comes from man. Okay, what's interesting about that is, until that point, there is no use of the word Ish. In other words, when God creates man and woman, he doesn't use the word Ish. He uses the word Adam. Okay? Adam is the one who uses the word Ish. Adam changes his identity from Adam to Ish. Why? Because she's there. Did you get that, guys? He changes his identity because of the presence of the woman. Her existence changes him, not the other way around. Right? Sure, he's the source. She comes from him. But as soon as he sees her, he says, "Oh my gosh, this is awesome. I have changed because she's here." Okay? Now, figure that out and then ask yourself, what does it mean when God says it's not good for man to be alone? Does that mean that he was by himself? No. I mean, think about this. I'll put this to the men. Would you rather have a wife or a perfect relationship with God in the perfect environment with all the animals doing what they were supposed to for you?
Wait a minute. That's not a good way to put that.
Sure. It's exactly the way to put it. Right? Adam has a blameless relationship with God, walks with him in the cool of the evening, right? He has all the animals named according to what he wants them to do for their purposes, and he has a perfect environment. He just can fish, he can hunt, he can do whatever he wants. Everything works perfectly. Okay? No, yeah, it was the Garden of Eden.
God said it's not good for man to be alone.
But it has nothing to do with the environment. Here's the interesting thing. When God says it's not good for man to be alone, he doesn't mean by himself. Because the word means to be isolated from yourself. Okay? Why does he need the woman? Because he needs a mirror image that isn't him. Do you understand why? I look in the mirror, and I'm telling you, the guy in the mirror never disagrees with me. If I say today, should we go, just fool around for a while? He says, sure, why not? Good for me, right? Should we just, take it easy today, not go to work? Yeah, I don't feel like going to work. He always agrees with me. I need an Isha who really is like me because she came from me, but who disagrees. I need somebody to fight back. Why? Because I can't understand who I am if there's no conflict in my life. It's true. My character is built from conflict, not from agreement. Listen, if you all agreed with everything that I said, there's no point in me being here. I used to say to my students, I'd assign a paper, and then I would say to them, don't write anything I already know. What's the point? I don't need to listen to myself. Tell me something I don't know. It drove them crazy because they thought education was just repeating back what I said. But it's not, is it? Education is thinking for yourself, coming to a conclusion, and debating with somebody else. Okay? So that's what my wife is all about. Thinking for herself, coming to a conclusion, and debating with me. Right? And that makes me better because it gives me a context for growth. Right? If we all agree, there's no point in us actually even saying anything. It's the disagreement that matters. Even Paul says that. The most important person in your congregation is the heretic. Oh, heretic doesn't mean unorthodox. Haresis means one who disagrees. It literally means one of a differing opinion. Fine. Those guys are important. I want people of differing opinions. If you all agree with me, I don't have to come back. You just got it, right? So let's have some differing opinions, please, because then I will learn, okay? And that's what I need with the relationships that I have, especially with the wife. So Isha says, oh my gosh, Ish says, oh my gosh, here's an Isha. Now I have someone to, counter with. And as a result, God says, oh, good, you're not alone anymore. You're not isolated to yourself. You actually have a counter ego that will bring into your life the idea of relationship, right? Because relationship is not about always agreeing. Relationship is about managing in disagreement, staying committed in disagreement, staying true when things don't go the way that you want, okay? So Ish, really, really important, because Ish defines what God thinks of a man, right? And it's defined by the man himself, because as soon as that verse goes by us, it starts talking in Genesis about the rest of the story, and it goes right back to Adam, right? Okay, got it? This is really important because Adam's real sin is not recognizing his dependence on relationships. When he finally comes to the point where he does not acknowledge his commitment to the garden event, he blames somebody else, right? He removes his commitment to the Isha by blaming her. And destruction follows. The relationship gets worse and worse and worse until the children kill each other. Right? It's really bad news. But it's all right there in those first few chapters. Okay? So, we need to know that if we're going to be in God's image, as men, we need to recognize the value of the woman for us. Not independently. People have value, she has worth. No, it's not what it's about. It's about without her, as the rabbis say, a man without a wife diminishes the world. Right? Diminishes the world because he's removed a relationship that's essential to the continuing of the world. God's intention is relationship. Okay? So, what does it mean? If you do not display the character of God in purposeful chesed, can you be human from a biblical point of view? And I think the answer is no. Which means that, here's the summary, guys, which means that with the help of God, I may become myself. The purpose of salvation is not to go to heaven. The purpose of salvation is to become human. God saves you in order that you may become human. Because when you're not under his grace, you're acting like an animal. He saves you to bring you back to what he intended, which was to be human, a copy of him. Okay? Got it? Good. Oh, yes, a question in the back, or are you just stretching? You're what? You're agreeing. Oh my gosh, we have nothing to talk about. Okay. No, you're right. I'm glad you're agreeing. That's so much nicer than having the question that I have to noodle my way through. Okay? Do you understand how important this is? Do you understand what when we say all men are created in God's image? I'm sorry, that's not the biblical worldview. When we don't recognize the importance of the woman in relation to the identity of the man, not a biblical worldview. All kinds of other things are happening back in the backstory that we didn't talk about. But listen, the bottom line is, if chesed is the most important word about the character of God, that's what you need to show. And you can do it. God will hold you responsible because it's something you can do. You can't be omnipotent, omniscient, omnipresent, eternal, etc. But you can show chesed and compassion and nasa, forgiveness, bearing another's burden. You can do all that. Okay? Yes?
So I just want to ask a question that maybe ties this becoming human. If our humanity, our ishness, is defined by our relationships and like a man and a woman, like you said, having someone to conflict with and still hold that relationship, that hesed relationship.
Yeah.
Is there something there that that's part of the image of God in us?
Oh my gosh.
Did he
Thank you
create, like, that, yeah, so is that part of why we were created, as in his image, so that he would have someone to conflict with and hold in relationship?
Okay, let's back up. Yaakov has a fight with a man in the middle of the night. Okay, you of all people have to read my book Crossing, which is all about how we come to identify who we are. Okay, so let's back up. Yaakov has this struggle with this man. The man, by the way, I believe is Yaakov's alter ego. It's him. He struggles with himself. You'll see why if you read the book. Okay, in that struggle, he is given a new name. What name is Jacob, given? Israel. And he says, you will now be called Israel because why? Because you have struggled with man and God and persevered. So what does that mean? Do you guys want to be a part of the kingdom of Israel? You want to serve the God of Israel? Guess what? You're going to struggle with God and man. You're going to struggle with God and man. But the whole point is, you will persevere. Isn't it wonderful to know that God is interested in conflict? It's not all peaches and cream, right? It's conflict, it's hard, it's work, it's agony, it's up and down. Read the Psalms, right? Israel means to struggle with God and man, to struggle with God. It doesn't mean it's going to be peace. You know, God's on my side, who should I fear? Right? But I'm going to have my issues with him too. Right? That's the meaning of Israel. You want to be in Israel? Get prepared for battle. Spiritual and human. Okay? Does that help? God created you in his image, which means that you're going to fight. Right? There ain't no other way. Yes? Why is there no other way? Because you have to redeem the world, guys. Tikkun olam. You have to bring the righteousness of God into the world. And that means you're going to be in conflict. Not only with the world, but with the way that you do it. And God's going to say, no, I think you should do this. And you're going to say, yeah, but, and, you know.
Okay, this has nothing to do with the ish. But I want to know.
Does it have to do with the Isha?
No, it has everything to do with your relationship with God.
Okay.
Okay. So.
My relationship or yours?
Mankind's relationship.
Mankind, women or men?
Because
it's different, you know.
Both.
Both, okay.
So let's take, for instance, you have two people that were told that there was a God, and they both believed it. One had no supplemental books or anything to teach him about this God, but he developed a relationship with him.
Yeah, Abraham.
The other one, well, I didn't say Abraham.
But that's what Abraham was. He had a relationship with God.
The other one
any commentaries.
Had all these books and all these Bibles, and he learned about God through those supplements.
Yeah, Maimonides.
That's how he got his relationship.
Yeah.
So, which relationship would you say is the stronger?
Wait a minute. Do I have to compare them? Can't I just say they both have relationship with God? Their journeys are individual. They're unique. God deals with them as they are persons, not on a scale, on a bell-shaped curve, right?
Yeah, but
and so no relationship is stronger than the other. They both work.
But you did mention earlier that this person, well, you didn't say it in these particular words, but this is what I got from it.
Okay.
This person had a relationship with God. He developed that relationship with him. Where the other person developed it, basically learned through this book. So the book was his idol.
Oh, yeah, because the book substituted for the relationship.
Yeah, so who?
Okay, well, that's an easy question.
Okay.
If the book substitutes for the relationship, then it isn't a relationship.
So he doesn't really have a relationship with God? He has a relationship with the book?
He has a relationship with the book.
Okay.
So, for example, if my faith depends on the certainty of the biblical text, and I remove the Bible, do I still have faith? No, I've got nothing. If my faith depends on the God behind the Bible, then I can remove the Bible and I still have the relationship. But if I'm so locked in that I have to have the King James in order to believe, then the King James is an idol. It's not God.
Okay.
Right? Okay? But if you're asking me which one of those other two examples were the stronger, I have no way to know that. I don't think God judges on stronger or weaker.
Okay, well, that was a...
Oh, okay. Okay. Do you understand what I'm saying? The only reason that the Bible becomes an idol is if it's a substitute for the relationship. So those kinds of people are really great at apologetics and proof texting, because they can say, you see this verse, this doctrine, supported by this, but the relationship isn't there. Because the relationship might be that God says, okay, Satan, have your way. And then things go to hell in a handbasket really quick. And the wife comes along and says, just bless that God and die. Because that's the word that she uses. She doesn't use the word curse. She used the word bless. Just bless God. It's irony. She says, just bless God and die. Because look what he's done to you. What does Job say? God gives, God takes away. Right? You will struggle with man and God and persevere. It's not so often a real fun to struggle with God. You know, he always has the upper hand. Yes. Yes, okay.
Hi. I'm so thankful for your teaching here because when I walked into this, I was a little scared and my paradigms were shifted and broken and fractured. But, you know, it's an answer to prayer because my relationship with God is more important. And sometimes I hold myself at home studying. And I should be active in the community, doing. And this has confirmed that. And I really just want to become who God wants me to be, to develop. And this has really broken a lot of paradigms that I've had to help him in the process of molding me into what he wants me to become.
You're welcome. It wasn't me. I just showed up.
I bless God that Gail invited you and you couldn't go to Israel and this all happened because this is really good. It's shattered a lot of things.
Yeah,
and
so you were supposed to be here and you showed up. That's good.
I know. It's awesome.
Thank you.
Thank you for what you're teaching.
Thank you. And by the way, I want to make a comment back here when you were talking about becoming human, okay? Listen to what the verb is. The verb is a participle. I'm becoming human, which means there's a whole there's a bunch of me that's still animal. And I just have to work on it. It's a process, okay? I'm becoming married. After my Roseanne and I make it to the grave, I will understand what marriage is, but only by hindsight. I'm becoming married, okay? I'm becoming human. I'm becoming faithful. I'm becoming a part of Israel. It's process. It isn't a once and for all, done, finished, sign on the bottom line, shelve the thing in the library bookshelf. It's continuing. That's the emphasis all the way through Scripture. Continue, persevering with God and man, right? So don't beat yourself up if you don't have the 17,000 pages of the Theological Dictionary of the Old Testament memorized yet, okay? Right? Just remember it's becoming. And everybody's journey is different. Everybody's pace is different. You don't compare. The worst thing that can happen is be like Mike, right? Is to start comparing yourself to somebody else. Because God doesn't work that way. He has some special thing in mind for you. The one tree capable of producing one kind of fruit that will feed everyone else. So relish that, concentrate on that, let him have the time he needs to get you on the becoming path, and be happy about it. Don't think, oh my gosh, if I only knew as much as Skip Moen. Because if you knew as much as Skip Moen, you would also have to struggle with Skip Moen's problems, and you probably wouldn't want those because they're pretty bad. Right? All this stuff doesn't come without pain. Right? So I'm so glad I'm not Pat, because I don't have to deal with his issues. Right? I mean, think about that. Think about what a blessing it is that you're not somebody else. By the way, that's part of the Jacob story. Jacob wants to be Esau. Why? Because Esau gets the father's blessing. So he spends his whole life trying to be somebody else until he finally gets to the river Jabbok, and he has to fight with himself to determine who he really is. Because God's not going to let him go back into the land until he's settled who he really is. He doesn't have to be Esau in order to be acceptable to God. Right? You don't have to be anybody else for God to do what he needs to do in your life. Yeah, time. We got 10 minutes to spare. Can you ask one question? Do you need permission?
And there's one there and one, so we have 3 or 4.
So how do you know what is your fruit to give away? Is that all the things that he has, or?
That answer is really simple. You ask. And you don't ask yourself. You ask other people because they're the ones who are eating the fruit. Right? So you ask me, and I say, Esther, you know what you do for me? Da, 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 da. You ask her, you ask Dave, you ask Pat, you ask Art. What is it that I contribute to your life? Because quite frankly, orange trees don't see their own oranges. Right? You're blind, basically blind to your own gifts. That means the gift, you know, that all those verses about the gifts of the Spirit, da 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 da. You look in the mirror and you say, "Oh yeah, I got that one." You check them all off because when you look in the mirror, the guy agrees with you. Right? Okay? That's not how it works. You have to ask other people, do I show these kinds of gifts? Right? That's the measure is the community, not you. Okay? Yes, somebody back there.
Yeah, I had a question because through the years I've heard, that Adam and Eve were made in the Father's image, and then after the fall, then everybody was made in the image of Adam. I mean, I've just heard that, and I've even used it myself.
Yeah, I don't know who told you that, but boy, they're full of it. No, no, I'm just kidding you. Okay. No, of course, there's all kinds of explanations of the image of God, but now you know what the image of God is because God actually tells you what his image is. And so now you get to ask yourself, was Adam like that? Was the woman, who's not Eve, by the way, was the woman like that? You know where the word Eve comes from? No, where? What, you don't? Eve, it isn't even a translation of the Hebrew. The Hebrew word for the woman is Chava. Okay? It doesn't get translated to Eve. Eve comes from a pagan Greek idea where they were looking for something to fill in there because they don't have a equivalent for Chava. But do you know what Chava means? Oh, don't tell me the mother of all living. Because if it meant the mother of all living, the text wouldn't have to tell you that it meant the mother of all living. Because the text isn't written to you, is it? It's written to Hebrew speakers. So if Chava meant the mother of all living, it wouldn't have to say Chava, the mother of all living, would it? It's like me saying Burger King, the hamburger store. But you already know that Burger King is the hamburger store, so why would I have to explain it to you, right? So if it says Chava, the mother of all living, it means that the word Chava didn't mean the mother of all living. Somebody has to tell you what it means. Do you know what it means? Nahum Sarna, the JPS commentary on Genesis, points out that in one of the steles, that's a column, a memorial column, in a cognate language of Hebrew, the word Chava shows up, and it means serpent. Ta-da! Okay, so let's back up. Who names the woman? God? No. God doesn't name the woman. All the story about the woman is the woman, right? The Isha. Adam names the woman after the fall. And he names her for the nemesis that created all of his pain. From now on, I'm going to call you serpent. So serpent, get my dinner. Serpent, take out the garbage. Serpent, clean that floor. Right? Which is, it's not surprising at all that she says about Adam, right? She gets pregnant and then she says, I have a new ish, not yalad, not child. I have a new ish with the help of the Lord. In other words, get rid of this guy. All he does is remind me of the worst day of my life. And so I'm going to get a new man that I can pour all of my love and affection into, my child. And by the way, that's the worst thing that a woman can do, because she was designed to be the protector, provider, revealer, negotiator, forgiver of the man, not the child. So if she turns all of her energy into the child, the husband is going to say, hey, what happened? You don't pay attention to me at all anymore. You invest all of your effort in the children, right? And what he doesn't realize is he probably pushed her to that, because he stopped listening to her as the voice of God in his life. Oh my gosh, all that revolutionary stuff, guardian angel. Go buy the book. Okay? Because listen, it's all in the Hebrew text. The problem is that we read the English. Okay? Go.
I'm busy memorizing the book of Judges. I'm supposed to be working with a group of youth ages 10 to 16, and this is their assignment for the year. And it's a book of messy stories. Some of them are great. I mean, Gideon and Samson. And Sodom and Gomorrah in chapter 19. Yes, kidnapping girls that are dancing. I mean, how does one even cope with this crazy book?
Yeah, but it's really clear, isn't it? Because what happens is, at the end of Joshua, the tribes enter into power grabs. And when they do that, the society begins to deteriorate. And as the society begins to deteriorate, they cry out to God. God sends a savior, a warrior savior. They repent, come back to God, and then within a few years, they're right back at it again. And Judges is the history of eventual civil collapse. Until the end of Judges, the tribes are almost at civil war. The one tribe is kidnapping women from another tribe because they've killed off all the men because of some issue over a prostitute that got hacked into pieces and sent to everybody. I mean, it's just, you couldn't make this stuff up, right? It's chaos. And why is it there? Because it sets up the need for a monarch. Everybody is ready to give their allegiance to a king because they can't stand the civil unrest anymore. Right? But they brought it on themselves. Right? God never intended it to be like that. In fact, at one point in Judges, he gets so upset with them that he says, I'm not fixing this anymore, live with it. Right? Okay? He stops sending the judges because they just won't learn. And as a result of that, they almost go into complete civil breakdown. Okay? And by the way, the reason Ruth is in there is because Ruth offers chesed as a recovery program for what the real king should be like, David. Right? There's all kinds of stuff going on that's interesting. And they're memorizing Judges because they want to know about the slaughter of all these people and how they killed one guy in the latrine and all this kind of, is that what why are you memorizing Judges of all books?
It's a selection between 1 year it's New Testament books and then the next year it's Old Testament. And this is just the routine, the cycle.
Okay. Well, they'll know the worst stuff about Israel, that's for sure. Okay.
Another question.
Yes.
So this is slightly off topic, but I was curious of what your worldview is in relation with politics and what's going on in the world right now.
A lot of non-humans are doing a lot of stupid things. Right? I mean, think about it. If you're non-human, what do you want? Power and control. You do anything to get it. The most addictive thing in the world is power, because there's never enough. Right? So, unfortunately, we live in a world that's dominated by non-humans. I don't think it's going to get much better. In fact, I think it's going to get worse. It's really a shame, because I think that at some point God will put an end to it. But in the meantime, I have to live in a non-human world. Not very much fun. I'm ready to go back to Parma. Yes.
Skip, hi. My thought, probably extending into another time or topic, is as there is one who is supportive of his creation, Yahovah, and his human designs, the trouble and the conflict that exists seems to be assigned to another character. And would that character be that of a Satan or a evil spirit? Or how is that design part of the trouble?
Yeah.
And at a certain point, that's where my mind is going next.
Okay. So I'll just make a few comments on Hasatan. Okay? Hasatan, you know, is a Hebrew word. It's not translated. It's transliterated. So we get Diablos, Diamone, Beelzebub, all this stuff from the cognates of Hasatan. But Hasatan is an Old Testament office, not a person. It's the office of the accuser, one that God designates to raise issues. Look, Job. And Hasatan, the accuser, comes into the divine council and says, hey, wait a minute. Have you been down on the earth lately? What do you think about this guy Job? Right? Hasatan is not an evil, horrible, awful, super agent. No, agent's not the right word. Superpower with all these, evil missiles that he can, get people on. He's running around trying to attack you, right? Hasatan in the Tanakh is simply the office of the prosecutor. That's all. Okay? That isn't who Hasatan is by the time you get to the first century. And the question that you should be asking is not, is Hasatan's role in the evil empire of the world, etc. You should be asking, where did the idea come from? Because if it's not in the Tanakh, how did we get to the first century where we have the father of lies and all that other kind of, and the outer darkness and, hell and all that stuff, okay? Because you can't even find heaven and hell in the Tanakh. There's no Hasatan, there's no heaven, there's no hell. It all shows up between the Babylonian captivity and the apostolic authors. So where did the ideas come from? I have a really interesting lecture called The Origin of the Idea of Hell. And I can show you where that idea comes from. But I suspect that the same is true for Hasatan, because hell and Hasatan are related, and for heaven. I just haven't done the heaven one, which is they all come out of the influence of Hellenism on the rabbinic thinking. Right? Because the ideas start to percolate when they come back from the Babylonian captivity. So there's influence from Babylon, right? And these ideas in Hellenism start influencing the way the rabbis think, and pretty soon we're talking about heaven and hell and Satan, the devil, right? Okay, does that mean it's not true? It's not real because it didn't come from Moses? No, I'm not making a judgment of whether it's real or not. I just want to know where the idea came from. Right?
That's a big deal.
Yeah, it's a big deal because it doesn't say that it's true or false. It just says, I want to know. Look, this is me. This is my motto. Every idea has a history. Every idea has a history. The round earth, the existence of repentance, the idea of Israel, Hasatan, they all have history. If I understand the history, I will start to understand what the word actually means, where it came from, okay? Like, for example, the long study that I've done on the doctrine of the Trinity. It has a history. It starts with an argument between Athanasius and Arius, right? If I don't know that, I'll think that the Bible is all about the Trinitarian God. But in fact, it's not about the Trinitarian God. The church is about the Trinitarian God, as understood by two guys who were in such conflict with each other that they literally burned people alive in the churches that disagreed with them, captured them, kidnapped them, tortured them, and ultimately slaughtered all the ones that disagreed. So we get the doctrine of the Trinity from 150 years of total violence in the church. And why do we have the doctrine? It's the doctrine of the winners. The losers were killed. Right? So I don't want my ideas of Hasatan, heaven and hell, to have that kind of history. But I need to know what the history is, don't I?